Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast extension of the nonprofit that educates and engages individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, we are looking at the Anthony Bourdain documentary Roadrunner. Grab the tissues. We hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. It's been a while since we have done an episode that is just straight up like a mental health conversation. And even though this is still a film we're talking about, I feel like Anthony Bourdain's story, and they even talk about it really a lot throughout the intro of this film. I think because of how recent his suicide was, you're going to kind of latch onto that. But this man, has just such a legacy, and it's also this very cautionary tale, and I'm very excited to get into this movie. Please welcome Abigail Bardwell with me.
Thank you for having me for this yet another emotional podcast. I feel like that's why I'm here. But no, this movie, I have been looking forward to this movie. It came out 2 days after my birthday, and so it was kind of like this weird birthday gift of, getting to see my Anthony Bourdain again. But it is a movie that breaks you for sure.
I feel like I couldn't do this episode without you. Solely because of, if you guys are new to the show or just stumbled upon this episode somehow, Abigail actually was a former chef, and she's now a mental health worker. And she's been on staff with us for about 6 months now. Mm-hmm. And this also, to me, I don't know nearly as enough about Anthony Bourdain, but this has been a documentary I've been looking forward to since HBO Max launched last year. Mm-hmm. And I honestly wasn't expecting to see this in a theatrical setting, but I'm really glad that I did, because it really engrossed me a lot more, the same way that the Mr. Rogers documentary that came out a couple years ago did.
Oh yes, that destroyed me too. I can't. Let's not do that right now. We can't do both. No, I agree with you. I was not expecting it to see it in like a theatrical sense either. I think it was really kind of more meaningful to me, though. I can only speak for my theater experience, but there was maybe like 7 of us, and so you kind of look at the other person and you're like, I know why you're here. Like, I get it. You're not. This isn't a movie you go to see just for like because you have a free Tuesday afternoon. Like, there's a purpose and meaning behind it, and I feel like we all found like a camaraderie in that theater seeing it together.
It is a very interesting documentary to go see in a theatrical setting. For me, I feel like, one of the things that they were talking about when they launched HBO Max last year was that this was going to be one of the exclusive titles. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I want to know more about Anthony, because I hadn't even really heard of the man prior to the news of his suicide. And mm-hmm. I did not get into a lot of culinary and like more documentarian stuff that he did in his later career until like a couple years into being married to my wife, and mm-hmm. she just grew up watching Food Network, and I was like, why would you want to watch someone cook? And then I found Guy Fieri, and that just changed everything.
Okay, all right. Here we go. Shots fired. No, I agree. It's funny because I had just first started dating Brandon, my fiance, when the news came out of his passing, and I very rarely get many birthday texts. I don't get a lot of Christmas. People know that I'm just not going to engage. I woke up that morning with literally over 150 text messages and DMs and messages from people like, "Are you okay?" Because I didn't know it had happened yet. I just woke up to it, and I think that really says a lot that that he had such an impact on me, but like in such a unique way, and in a way that everyone kind of knew around me, and that's like how they kind of engaged with me. But I think that's pretty common, that a lot of people weren't really super familiar with him until his passing, because it was just so tragic and, unforeseen.
Yeah, I feel like when you watch it, though, in context of the documentary, one of the things that I really appreciate about this documentary was the way that it felt so narrative driven. Like, all of these events are actually, like, they actually took place. They, we can see 15 years of television. We can have, we talk with all of these guys and characters, gentlemen and ladies that knew Bourdain, and you kind of really see the impact that he had on the world of culinary art, not just in restaurants, but also as well in the setting of his television shows. His Parts Unknown and kind of even really starting to take on some new parts. And so there's some of the things that really surprised me about his documentary, but it feels so much better having all of the context with why he ultimately ended up taking his life untimely.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about I guess depending on when you familiarized yourself with Anthony Bourdain, you saw him in these different lights. So I first got to know him. My dad waxes poetic about three things: travel, a good writer, and good food. And so Anthony Bourdain was the trifecta for my dad, and he kind of brought him into my life through we watched his show on the Food Network. And it wasn't until later that I got to kind of familiarize myself with him in his first book. And it's kind of funny how it was I was always the person who would look to my left or right, and you'd see people Bieber or Justin Timberlake or the fandom. And I was like, oh, that's ridiculous. How could you get into that? And then one day I woke up and I realized that I was so enthralled with this man's life, and I didn't know how it happened. But we were kind of in my head, kind of two ships in the night in how I got to know him, because I started to know him as a writer, and then I got to know him as a cook, and through my time in culinary school and reading his book. And one of the things I love so much about his writing is how candid and vulnerable it was. And one of my favorite things that he ever wrote about was he was in his culinary class at the CIA, and they were learning how to make a stock, bone stock. And everyone else's was, super watery and lame, and because, they're all first time cooks. And he kept bouillon packets in his pocket, and he would put the bouillon packets in the broth, and his chef just thought he was the most amazing broth maker. And he was like, yeah, it took me forever to actually figure out how to do it, because I just cheated my way through all of culinary school. And just that vulnerability and openness really kind of humanized him for me.
Well, let's talk about what really kind of placed him on the map, so to say. Was the bestseller of Kitchen Confidential. And I really enjoyed the way that this film painted him as, right even before he gets the book deal, is he's such an articulate soul. And just hearing this email as kind of about how he is in seeing Tokyo for the first time was such a profound thing that I was like, I'm not really a guy that likes to read memoirs. They're not really my cup of tea. But after walking out of this movie and just kind of hearing the excerpts and voiceover work that they captured from Bourdain, I was like, this is something that I need more of. I need to know a lot more of Anthony Bourdain, and kind of I love the fact that we've both worked in food to different degrees, and I love that Kitchen Confidential really the film talks about how it kind of just bears all for the food industry. Everything you think that you're kind of quote eating that's good and it's fine probably actually isn't.
Yeah, so the thing that I loved about his writing was, yeah, you're right. He was like such a profound writer. Like just his thoughts were just so like articulate and observant. And it's the kind of, thoughts that you have yourself, but you don't really like share with other people because you don't think that other people have those thoughts. And so it was really validating for me, especially, like even touching on the fact that here is a man in the culinary industry in the 80s, like one of the most like back-breaking, sweat-making jobs that they had. And he was like this soft person. And something that I realized that really kind of broke me with this movie was it made me realize that while I thought I was watching this man grow and become stronger and better and bigger and like take on these challenges and like overcome all of his barriers, he was actually breaking down. And that's something that really hurt for me is, kind of hearing, like you said, his first thoughts about Tokyo, and then kind of hearing how he talked about it like 15 years later. And there was just like this sense of defeatism that, I don't know, it makes me so sad to think about.
Well, I think to a degree, and to your point, it's a lot of the things that he kind of saw. We talk and we joke around about, losing internet or like having Apple problems, and I'm just
hey. That just happened. That's too soon.
But like, or like not being able to like log into like Netflix, like those are all what we consider like first world problems. Like there are I would imagine that there's someone listening to this right now that doesn't understand the weight of other cultures and other countries' economical, issues or poverty, or might even just be like, one of the reasons why we started this podcast was because that we saw that there was such a ignorance for suicide prevention and how big of an issue suicide really is. And so one of the things that you really got to see this film captures so extraordinarily well is it's 2006 when they're in they were shooting somewhere, and they basically had this like attack on where they were shooting.
Was he in Beirut? He was somewhere near there.
Yeah,
he may have been Beirut, but yeah.
Yeah, so he kind of like really started to like grow weary, and I think a lot of what had kind of happened with that's kind of where you start to see his story turn. Is he's no longer just traveling just to taste things. He's actually seeing and experiencing things that are arguably humanity at its worst. And I don't know about you, but I know that like if I'm around a lot of those environments, like I start taking on a lot of those traits for my own mental health. And so I think that for him, he kind of had this very likewise reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you think about traveling and you think about getting the opportunity to travel and like live out your traveling dreams, that's all he wanted in the beginning. He like there's even video of him saying like, I can't believe this is my job. Like I literally get to go around the world and eat. That's my job. And in the very beginning, yeah, that is what it seemed like. And you're so right, where like you become a sponge for all of these, maybe even they seem benign experiences. But I feel like if you are a person who's more open to vulnerabilities and you're more transparent and you absorb more things, it stacks up on you. And I was talking to one of my friends earlier who is a gamer. We're both gamers, and the way we kind of like analyzed it, it's kind of like when very beginning, you're like level 1, you're first starting. Let's imagine World of Warcraft. Okay, you're first starting, and you're like, man, I have to build the scene. And you're like, man, I really wish I could get to like that island over there, but I can't until like I'm level 40. And then you can get there, and you don't really care about it anymore. And I feel like that's kind of what happens when you travel a lot, is like you lose that kind of innocence and curiosity of the exposure, because you become overexposed.
Yeah, traveling's a really interesting thing when you're kind of taking into consideration, maybe not to the extreme that Bourdain was going, is he traveled, I think the film talks about like 250 days a year. And but I think when you're traveling, and from someone that used to tour, like I would tour very sporadically, just kind of go out. It's like once every like 4 months, and like that satisfied me. But even now, like with COVID and kind of starting to get back into the routine of doing events and doing things for victims again, it's like, man, like I'm like really excited. But it is that balancing act, like you talk about, like it's kind of like, almost like a marriage, where you in the first like year you have that honeymoon phase, maybe first 2 years, and then you start to have the issues of like maybe it's not enough sex, or there's a financial crisis, or just there's a lack of communication. Like there's so many different factors into that. But then you kind of start to see marriage for like what it really is. And I think that that's really ultimately what started to happen to Bourdain, was that exposure. Maybe it wasn't to the point of overexposure at that point, but it was to this point of this is no longer like just cutesy, like this is real.
Yeah, you're totally right. And obviously I've never had that experience as Bourdain had, but, someone who struggles with my own mental health, and, like seeing where I'm at, and then kind of seeing where I think I should be, like he mentioned, like he should be happy just grilling hot dogs in the back with his family, but he's like got kind of stuck. And like, is he traveling? Is he a world traveler? Or is he like a stay-at-home dad? And you get kind of stuck in these places of where you think you should be, and you stop kind of communicating on what you need. And I like that really, when they went over that, especially like the hot dogs in the backyard, and you can just kind of see like there's just no happiness there. And just like that, it just gets lost between, who am I? Am I this person that's, traveling 250 days a year and is on all the time? Or am I at home and I still be on and be a dad?
There's a movie that was released back in the early 2000s called Up in the Air, and it's with George Clooney and Vera Farmiga from the Conjuring films. And one of the things that he kind of talks about in that movie is like how he's constantly like going through like basically living out of a suitcase, and that's a really tough thing to do because there's no sense of normalcy. And Bourdain has this, is what I walked away from the film is that, and I talked about this in Pig for the last episode of That's High Praise, is that Bourdain is very much a cautionary tale, because I think we pursue these lavish dreams of wanting to have that bestseller and wanting to be on television and wanting to be known and constantly being around Instagram, and eventually you have this like such like disconnect that ultimately ends up happening. And there comes a point even in Bourdain's story where he actually starts suffering from agoraphobia, which is a fear of actually going out of the house. And you have a guy that is literally traveling as of his job, but there's no foundation for him to come back to. And go ahead. That
scene, so when they showed like kind of clips of his like Instagram reel or whatever it was, and it's just him out like scanning out of his window, and it just has agoraphobia on it. I just looked over at Brandon and I was like, oh, that's it. Like that hurts so much, because like you said, there's this person who they just put everything into traveling, and then you become so sensitive to it that traveling hurts you. And it's so difficult, because with Bourdain, his story was even so unique in that he didn't even really want fame or he didn't try to become famous. He just wrote something and it blew up, and it just happened to be the right time and place. And then, like he kind of was like the manic pixie dream girl of the cooking world, and he caught just like the right end of like all these people's attentions. And I actually saw him twice when he was doing book tours, and he always repeats over and over again, like, why are you all here? Like, I just wrote a fucking book. I just wrote about how you shouldn't order fish on a Monday, and now I'm here, and it makes no sense. Like, it made no sense. It was really right place, right time, and you can't prepare yourself for that.
Yeah, in kind of as you're going along in the film, and kind of once you kind of reach the last act of the movie, there's a scene, I think probably one of the more heartbreaking scenes in there, is when he turns to one of his friends and just goes, I think it was the other like really famous chef, and he just goes, are you happy? And that's such a loaded question, because I think that we oftentimes we get so wrapped up in wanting to, be as busy as possible that we never leave ourselves times for rest. And I think that's another portion of really what kind of led to a lot of his depression, was not only the isolation, not only the loneliness, but also, not having that foundation, not having that rest, just constantly going. I mean, it's eventually going to take its toll on you, because your body was only meant to be pushed so far. And I don't know.
Well, and also if you take into account, like, we need to heal. And not only do we need to heal physically, but we also need to heal mentally. And I feel like Bourdain went from, because it mentions this very briefly in the film, which kind of bothers me a little bit. Like, that's one of my pet peeves about when people talk about Bourdain, is it's like there's 44 years of his life that people are just like, that happened. And then they wrote this book and now we care. Like, there's 44 years of like trauma and addiction, and, like, he couldn't afford food. Like, he literally could not afford food. He slept on the floor. Like, it was hard. It was everyday backbreaking work just to, pay rent. And, that suffering, I feel like, was still always there, because he, mentioned numerous times that he felt like he didn't deserve his first wife, that, he kind of pushed her love away because he didn't really get it, and then after that, he just kind of was flung into this fame and infamy in a way, and then, like, having a second wife, and then his daughter, and it's like, well, now you're stuck. Now you have a daughter here, and I feel like he just got kind of stuck in between like being kind of transient and like, if I die tomorrow it doesn't matter, like, like the Cook mentality of being young and reckless, and then being accountable for all these other people, including all of his fans.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Yeah, and I feel like that's another thing that, like, again, not knowing a whole lot about Bourdain's life, and the film does really kind of like say, okay, we're going to start from Kitchen Confidential, but we're going to give you a little bit of insight as to, like, how he got this book deal. And they do at one point talk about it in the movie about how like many people forget that he was an addict. And I think so much you see so much of those traits littered throughout the film, littered throughout his life, where it was cooking is an addiction now, and like now the fame, and like now the traveling, and eventually, you know, the thing of addictions, at least in my experience, and both firsthand and secondhand, is that addiction has this tendency to really push people away, and you sacrifice so much because you're continuously chasing the thing in which you're addicted to. And you know, we see that with Bourdain. We see that with his that mentality sticking there between, you know, sacrificing his first wife, second wife, even at being a parent to his young daughter, and then also subsequently we also kind of get a little bit of that with the last girlfriend as well.
Asia.
And so, you know, a lot of that stuff does end up kind of boiling up to the surface. And one of the best quotes that I've ever heard about addiction comes from the Ryan Murphy show, Nip Tuck. And it says, you know, we're all addicts, even without you or the drugs. And I think that, you know, when people hear the word addiction, that their mind automatically goes, oh, it has to be like alcohol, it has to be you know, some form of narcotic. And it's like, no, like, from someone that has struggled in the past with addiction, my biggest addiction, my biggest vice that I have now is coffee. Doesn't sound like it is, but it's a thing, and like my body physically reacts ill if I don't go without it.
You have such a great point, and like, this is a platform that I always speak on any chance I can get, is the concept of an addict. And, you know, I've been there as well. I'll use my eating disorder as an example. That was like my first big addiction, and I actually had to go to like a recovery for it. And one of the most profound things that I was told there, that I still continue to remember every single day, is that once you're an addict of something, you are always an addict. You are always going to be seeking that dopamine rush that you got from being in active addiction, and you're always going to be seeking, whether you are currently in active addiction may or may not be the issue. But once you have that thing in your head of like addiction, it's always kind of there. And I think that's really prevalent with Anthony Bourdain, because like you said, he went from, you know, the honestly, like, being in the fast-paced world of cooking, and like being around all the drugs, and like the people thinking you're so cool, and the late nights and like the late mornings, and it does become an addiction, because you think like, oh, this is it. It's kind of like, you know, the cheapest way to get celebrity status, to feel like you're a celebrity, is to be a cook, and, you know, like have people buy you shots at the end of the night, and like, you know, you feel awesome. But then, you know, he talks about quitting heroin cold turkey, and like, as someone who again has been there, like, I just guffaw, like I can't even imagine, but it makes so much sense because it became transient. He went from heroin to, you know, throwing himself into cooking, from throwing himself into cooking into like the show and the writing, and then everything from there. And you could see the microcosms of his addiction to finally, I forgot who said it in the movie, but he became addicted to his girlfriends, to a point where it was isolating him and damaging his social world. And like you said, that's what happens in addiction.
There's also to go off of that particular scene that you're talking about, there's a scene where like he's like telling everyone about how nicely she parks. And like, yes, he just kept like everyone that would listen, every one of his crew, and like everyone that walked by was just like kind of almost like a 5-year-old getting his first home run. Like, you know, you have proud parents, and when you're in Bourdain's status, like those things like very much like shift. Like there's even another thing that he takes on is the Taekwondo.
Jiu-jitsu.
Jiu-jitsu, which is what it was. And like, I mean, he just completely like engulfed himself into that world, into that culture, like into training. The documentary says that he quit smoking, and passions are a great thing to have, and we victims and villains, we strive and we encourage going and being creative because it's such a great outlet for mental health. But also at the same time, like, you have to make sure that you're limiting yourself and kind of putting restrictions on yourself. That way it's not becoming an obsession and an addiction, much like we see with Bourdain in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's kind of something that, I mean, I know I struggle with, is trying to identify the boundary between being passionate about something and then becoming obsessive about something. And I mean, the jiu-jitsu was a great example, and I think that also kind of isolates what happens in when you have an addiction and then you're just kind of done, when everything goes away with it. Like, I've had moments in my life where I've just had to move out of a place because I needed to get clean and get away, and just everyone went with it. Even if they were good friends, they're in the barrel, like they get thrown out with the bathwater, and that's kind of what we see happen. But yeah, with the parking thing, that made me so uncomfortable, because like you could see, that he's just wanting people to like be on board with like how like good it makes him feel. But at that time, like his kind of like monitor, his radar of what made him feel good was just so off that everyone's like, it was just parking. Like, why? That makes no sense. And you could see even like still it made her uneasy. But yeah, that was a rough one for sure.
There's also another scene where they're doing an interview with one of his crew, and they're talking about the time in his life where he specifically got like really hardcore into jiu-jitsu, and they were spending these like 10-12 hour days together, and cameraman was like, yeah, like all he wanted to talk to me about was jiu-jitsu. And it's like, dude, like that's awesome, but I don't know anything about it, man. Like
this is hour 5, and I still have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, like and I mean, like, and that's kind of like one of those like those like boundaries as well, is like, what can I say to, because this guy is paying my rent right now, like he's paying my mortgage and my electric
bill. That's really
bill.
Good. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Wow.
So it's like how do I be nice and say like, hey, like that's great, but like, we're here to talk about traveling, we're here to talk about conditions, and just whatever we're actually in this city to do, let's do that. Let's focus on the thing at hand. And I think that sometimes you can get like really hyper focused, and for some reason, and this is a really weird example, but when I was dating my wife for the first time, well, we only dated once, so
yeah, this went okay. Podcast number 2.
So when we started dating, I became like weirdly obsessed with Gremlins. Like I grew up on the movie and then just randomly refound it one day, and I was obsessed to the point of like I knew like what kind of material like Gizmo was named after, like made out of, like how the production and everything was done, and I just got like really into it and like really involved and my wife kind of pointed out, she's like, that you're kind of like obsessed, like
mm-hmm.
This is a dangerous place to be. And the way that scene in particular where you have one of his crew being like, it's hour 5, hour whatever, that's a really dangerous place to be, and like hyper focusing on that. I think those are traits that he, and not to say that he could, but like those are possible traits that he picked up from addiction.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like if, God forbid this ever happens to me, if this ever happens, just please make it stop. If there's ever a film crew following me in my life and documenting my life, that would be horrifying. But I feel like in retrospect, I would see that too, like as someone who is an addict, not actively, but has an addict mind, like that, I do that, and I recognize that. But I think something that was really, really sad and really heartbreaking in that documentary was there's like a scene where like they're talking with someone who's like immigrating. I forgot exactly what it is, but like his story is like so painful and it has to do with like leaving his family, and like right in the middle of it, Asia's like, oh no, wait, like we need to change the lighting, and Anthony Bourdain literally is like, hold that thought. And that's something that would never ever have happened like 15 years prior. Like he sacrificed so much of himself to get the genuine scene and the genuine emotions of these people, and now here he is like basically staging this scene. It turned into a scene for his girlfriend because, you know, she was a filmmaker, and so it went from things being genuine and like, if they're not perfect, they're not perfect. If the light's too bright, the light's too bright. It went from that to being so like manicured and manufactured.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it goes back to that question, you know, are you happy? I think this idea of, man, like I have a job that I like, or, you know, I have a roof over my head. Like we are, you know, this idea of the American dream is that it's dead, you know? And I think for our generation specifically, like if we're able to pay all of our bills and have enough money left over to go to the movies, go out to eat, you know, collect VHSs, you know.
Too soon, God. Too soon. God. You're throwing me under the bus here.
Hey, I collect VHSs too.
Oh, don't make it sound like it's me. It's not me. I'm not doing that.
But I think
anyway, no, continue.
I think to this point is like we're always chasing, you know, like that's our version of what the American dream is that if we can pay all of our bills and have a little bit of money left over to put it towards something that we love. And I think at the same time, like our sense of like happiness is contingent on how much money we have in the bank, or you know, the circumstances of our day. And it's like, one of the things that I've always talked about in doing victims, whether that's been panels, podcasts, or just talking to people, you know, at conventions, it's always been like, depression is a liar, and depression is this thing that really makes you kind of see just the ugliest side of life. And the fact that you have clothes on your back, the fact that you can breathe, have, you know, you're healthy, like there's so much to be happy and joyful for in this life. And I think our sense of happiness is kind of polluted in what we think that definition is going to be. And so with Bourdain, I feel like specifically with the scene that you're talking about is, you know, as well as hyper focusing and trying to do everything to make Asia happy. What you end up actually getting is you lose so much of what made that show compelling. For one, two, you make the circumstances of the gentleman telling the story, like he just doesn't matter. Then third, you also kind of, you know, you get this false sense of, you know, you're trying to do everything now. And I think that in a way, like relationships are one of those things that like you really have to work hard at. You really have to, you know, put in so much blood, sweat, and tears to make them work and to make them be successful. And I feel like, you know, Bourdain at this point in his life was just still kind of in that honeymoon phase where it's like, you know, I want to make my girlfriend happy, but, you know, what are you sacrificing at the cost of the happiness of one person?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good, going back to like the idea of the cautionary tale, a really good cautionary tale on what happens if you kind of, you know, come from nothing, you don't have a sense of identity, and then you get thrown into this surplus and you don't really know your own authenticity or your own worth, and so you don't really know what to spend that surplus on. And so, I mean, this is something I struggle with where, you know, like I will get so impassioned with something, kind of lose myself in something, and then I find that I never understood the authenticity of what it was, so I don't really know how to make it happen again. and I just keep trying to like people please and please these people, and that's never really where it came from. And so, you know, if you look into, you know, kind of the life of Bourdain, he says this a few times, like throughout many of his shows, where, you know, like he came from like clam shucking, you know, like he would like scale fish during the summertime, like that's what he did so that he could have enough money to like get a bag of weed. Like, honestly, that's where he started cooking from. And then one day you turn around and he has every opportunity you could possibly imagine. If you don't have that self-worth, that self-love, then you're going to be spending it on all the wrong places.
Yeah, that's a great point. And self-worth in particular, I feel like is it's a really great way to put it. That dynamic of you're kind of almost like currency. It's like, what am I spending my self-worth on? Like what am I pouring passion and so much of myself into is like, you know, there have been several times where like I get behind this mic and I'm like, is it really worth it? And, you know, over the years, like I've learned that that's just kind of my depression being stupid and my anxiety, you know, trying to suffocate me. And one of the things that, you know, I have come into known is that, you know, how important identity is and how important rest is. And also, you know, making sure that I'm balancing my self-worth isn't just built up in a single group of people, or it's not built up in who I am as a husband or who I am as a podcaster, or a hard cinephile. You know, it doesn't matter about any of those things, because at the end of the day, like, my self-worth is going to be, I understand my self-worth, and I feel like to a certain extent, like, you know, there you have to know your self-worth, and really what you spend it on, I feel like is going to make or break you, and eventually you're going to see those fruits. You reap what you sow. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
So there's something that I think happens when you go from just kind of like living your life, and then you get thrown into like this world of being in front of people, whether it be podcasting, whether it be, you know, like the first, I mean, even still I struggle with like imposter syndrome being a counselor, because every day I wake up and I'm like, well, I'm just this broken person helping other broken people. Like, this makes zero sense. But once you really understand the value of like our life lessons and what we can hand off to other people, like, I think that was one of the things that was so tragic about Bourdain, was he found so much value in telling these people's stories and found no value in telling or representing his own. And like, he ended up like getting lost in that, because, you know, at some point you stand up there in front of a crowd of people that, you know, like I've done, you know, like platform talks before, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm talking to these people about addiction. And the other day I was like thinking about my own. But I think that vulnerability is really important, but that's also, I think, something that gets lost when you get like exalted into like this celebritydom, because you don't want to, you have an image now, you have like a brand, you know, and whether or not you think you do, you do. And I think that's kind of, yet again, we'll add it to like, what is this, number 4 of the tragic tales of this documentary? It's like just kind of, you know, losing yourself in what you think you should be. And, you know, like seeing that imposter syndrome, like, I could see it from the very beginning. Again, like I saw him a few times on tour, but even like from the first time and the last time I did, and which was like a 6-year difference, it was just shocking, the difference, because in the first one he kind of went from bountifully speaking about these things because he didn't think anyone was listening, to then later realizing everyone's listening and he feels like he has nothing to say that's important. And you can kind of like see that, and like the scene we were just talking about in the documentary where he's like, is this good? Like, is the lighting good? Are we good? And it's like that the whole point of it is, are you good?
Yeah, and I think you see that with his career at some points, because it's no longer, I want to tell stories about how good this culture's food is, but I want to tell these stories that are important and that matter. And that's why, his last series, I want to say, took place on CNN. It was a lot more, we're going to travel and we're going to tell these important stories. And it's hard, because one of the things that I've found in my own life is that I don't think that anybody wants to hear my story, but what I've come to realize is that the pain and the hurt and the trauma that I've endured, if I am vulnerable about it, this podcast might be a platform to help other people.
Absolutely.
And so over the years, I've been more vulnerable to share about my depression, my anxiety, my pornography addiction, my anger. Like I've gone through so much hell, and having a platform like this, whether it is podcasting or it is doing a panel at a convention, or just even talking with somebody, I've found myself that like my pains and the hurts and just all of the trauma that I've endured, they matter, because A, I wouldn't be who I am today without it. B, victims wouldn't be a thing. And C, it makes people feel like they're not alone, because that's the thing that we've talked about: addiction, we've talked about suicide, we've talked about depression. All of those things, they make you feel like you're alone. Like, I can't tell my story because nobody's going to know how I feel. And suicide statistics and depression statistics and addiction statistics say otherwise.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I can just imagine, or I'm remembering like these times where I'd be standing in front of people, and it's like, in my head, I'm like, man, I'm such a broken person. How am I going to help other broken people? But what you don't like think about at the time, and you realize it later, is that, putting yourself in that seat, listening to a broken person, that gives you so much validation, because what that says is that no one's perfect. Like, you can be an imperfect person and still be in front of people telling your story, because what happens is, like, in depression and in, anxiety and what have you, you kind of like build up this idea of who you should be, and it is unmanageable. And just kind of like even validating those tiny like breaks in other people where it's like, I haven't experienced that, but I hear you and I'm here for it. And if you want to talk about, like just being there for each other, it's kind of like it's a ladder system. And what ends up happening is that we just have this thought of who we should be. I will go into work and I'm like, who should I be what should I look like today? Like, I'll have certain clients and it's like, well, should I be more conservative because their mom's more conservative? And so you get kind of like caught up in that, when really the reason you're doing it is because you're you. And so I think that's, something that I will always cherish about, Bourdain's storytelling, especially in, like going from how cocky he was in the very beginning, like, oh, I hate this person, like this person's fake, whatever. It's just starting out in his career, to later on having more transparency and vulnerabilities and having more life experience, and being like, wait, hold on, I was wrong. Like, we're all just kind of fucked up here. Like, we're on a more level platform. That's something I really admired about his writing.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of guts to admit when you're wrong, and kind of like walk back what you said. Like, it shows a lot of growth and it shows a lot of maturity, and I appreciate that you get to see a lot of that throughout the film. That you kind of, like you said, like you have that juxtaposition of like, this is where he was when he started. Here you have a guy that is literally living paycheck to paycheck, just by happenstance happened to sign this book deal. Book blew up, and now in the new millennium is starting this 15-year journey that is going to take him literally all over the world. And I think in that sense you start to see things that weren't there before, because you have that experience and because you have those moments of traveling and exposing yourself to other cultures and other cuisines and other tragedies, and kind of how other countries and cultures experience things like trauma, poverty, depression, cuisine, and still being able to at the end of the day still find happiness in the end.
Yeah, I think the big thing about Anthony Bourdain to me personally is I feel like he kind of mentored me out of being a bitch. And I grew up, I was very sheltered, but I was also very smart. And so in my head, it was like, well, I don't need to know about that experience because I have this experience and I'm like ahead of the game and I like know more than you. And especially starting out my culinary career, that's where we all start, is we all just think we're better than everyone. And I kind of, grew up with that Anthony Bourdain of like, oh, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And, this is why I succeeded. And then kind of like seeing that vulnerability later on, especially my pinnacle example of this is he went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and he sat down with Chef Emeril Lagasse, and they sat together like eating jambalaya or something. And Anthony Bourdain looks at him and he's like, how do you feel about the fact that I started out my career and part of the reason I'm famous is just making fun of you? And because like he just like openly just made fun of all of these people and just made characters out of them. But what you find out later, that's because he was so uncomfortable with being famous as well. And so kind of like seeing that breakdown, I would be reading that book and it's like, wow, I don't have to be a bitch today. Thanks, Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, and you start to kind of chase after things that you think you want or you need. And to your point, like there is a point in the film where he addresses kind of like the state of like where Food Network was in the 90s and kind of like how it's like this like wholesome, like this is how you do things. And I still think to a degree like it's still in that realm.
I wouldn't know. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I don't either, but like when I used to watch it more often, like Food Network definitely, like out of all the content I consumed, definitely felt the most wholesome.
Oh, absolutely. It was such like an evener of beings, like everyone could sit down. And I think even like when we first started talking, we were talking about the Food Network. You're like, that was the one thing that, like my wife and I could do is we could just, even if I wanted to watch this movie and she wanted to watch that, we both could watch the Food Network. I mean, what are you really going to say? No, like just like, no, I do not want to learn how to make marinara sauce. Thank you. I'm good. No, like, I think it just kind of like, even if it's just, a less than quality show. I mean, like, I'm throwing myself under the bus. The other day, Brandon and I were watching the Great Food Truck Race or whatever. I was like, this is so corny. It had Vinny from Jersey Shore on it. Like, it was just a shit show. But we, then we looked up and it was like 6 episodes later and we're like about to put money on these people, like about to fight over this. But it's like, it brings everyone together.
It does, and like you had said, like it might not be like the most quality entertainment, but then there was that then you had this shift where you had characters like Anthony Bourdain and Gordon Ramsay that were starting to kind of like be like tell it like it is and really change what the medium could be capable of. Mm-hmm. And I think in some ways that like you said, like he did feel uncomfortable in that way. And like there were several times where, I think humor for a lot of people can be this like almost like escape to where you don't have to actually confront the problems because you can just do it through sarcasm or whatever have you. And I think to a degree, like the example you just talked about with Bourdain and Emerald, like, you know, it sucks when you have to kind of confront those fears and have to confront those realities and being like, man, like I am now the exact thing that I was making fun of.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many of my therapy appointments I've walked into, like, I am a self-deprecating comedic genius today, and I have so much to make fun of myself for. And then, like, in the middle of it, I'm like, oh, shit, wait, like, there are actually feelings behind this. But there's so much truth to that, especially if you're, like, a more socially awkward individual, where, like, just that, you know, self-deprecating humor is what you use, because it's so much easier to discount yourself and your stories than it is to challenge like the totality of its worth with other people. And I think that's again, like something I admired so much watching, like later Bourdain, earlier Bourdain, like you could tell he was definitely kind of a dick, like like absolutely. But later on, especially when he like revisited places, he'd be like, well, the first time I visited this place, like I didn't really experience anything. I experienced what I thought was an experience, but now we're going to have an actual experience. And like that's where he would actually talk with the people. And it does suck having to, you know, kind of revisit. Like I said earlier, if I had a film crew following me around, I would just lose it, because I don't want to see those comparisons. But, you know, like that's something I definitely admired so much, is like, and it may have come from like the lack of self-worth that he had, but like the ability to go back and be like, you know what, I was wrong.
Yeah, it shows, like I said, like it takes a lot of growth on his part. And also, to an extent, I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about with like the self-deprecating humor. I know that like I've made like a lot of like different references throughout the course of this, but there's a line in Pitch Perfect where
your references are so obscure and so wonderful.
Look,
like we went from, and you know what's funny is we're tying Anna Kendrick into your reference you had earlier to this one. Just saying.
Boom. Yeah. I forgot she was in Up in the Air for a second.
I did.
But we get introduced to the character of Fat Amy, and another character that she's introducing herself is like, you call yourself Fat Amy? She's like, yeah, I do it so twig bitches like you can't do it behind my back. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like knowing that that's a reality, that, you know, people are gossiping or talking about you behind your back, but kind of like taking control of that. And I think to what you're talking about specifically with Bourdain is like, he's this journey and this season of constantly traveling and visiting and revisiting these places and saying, you know, like, I was wrong when I was originally here. Like it shows such maturity on his part. And it kind of almost, I would you say that like also that kind of maybe possibly even added to like his depression in some ways?
I would absolutely say yes. And what I was going to add on to this is like there are even episodes where you see that growth, but it's kind of like in this air of sadness. You know, there's one where he goes with his wife who he has the child with. They go to Sardinia because that's where she's from. And he has it's the first episode where he like includes his whole family. So like you see him playing with his daughter, and they showed scenes of that in the documentary too. But it's kind of the first time you see him like in this role of like a husband and a dad, and it kind of makes you feel kind of awkward. So you're like, man, this is the first time. But you kind of realize, and this is what I realized in the documentary, it's like the reason he didn't show it is because he wasn't comfortable with it. And you know, like how can you really be like, oh yeah, here's my daughter and here's my wife and here's us cooking hot dogs, when, you know, you don't. And when you do, you don't like it, you know, like, and so that made much more sense in retrospect, because I mean, that episode was adorable. It's one of my most favorite, but that makes sense to why there was less of that.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, to a degree, like you see that with his first wife, like she ends up leaving because like she doesn't want that spotlight. Like that's a heavy burden to lay on someone. Yeah. And you know, you joked around about like having film crews follow you around. Like I feel like I would kind of be in the same exact boat. I don't think that I have enough interesting things to talk about to kind of like warrant such things. But, you know, I don't know necessarily that, like, my wife would be like, oh, hey, like, let me film you guys or whatever. Like, hi. Abigail's fiance just popped in.
Just popped in for a second.
But you know,
it's funny, but it's so funny you say that, because here I am, like, I do podcasts with you, and I'm so excited every time, because it's like, man, you know, first of all, what amazing references am I going to get today? Like, please, like I live for that. But every time it's like such an interesting experience, because I mean, yeah, I, you know, talk to people about mental health is like my job, but it's different to do it when you're, you know, talking specifically about, let's say, Anthony Bourdain, and like how it, you know, the mutual experience you have with someone, and that's so intrinsically, you know, individual, and like just that mutual experience you share with someone. So it's funny to hear you say that, because I'm sitting here like, how could you say that, Josh? But that's a perfect example of it.
I don't know how to respond to that. So do I say sorry? Question mark.
Thank you. Why are we so weird?
To quote Gaga, I was born this way.
Stop. Oh my, there's so many of them. No, but going back to like what you're originally saying, I have a specific friend. How do I talk about this without talking about it? So I grew up in the South, and it was not very kind to all types of people. And one of my best friends in high school, he was one of the only people of color in our school. And he would just throw himself under the bus. Like, before you could even like get within 5 feet of him, he was already making a joke about how he was like the only black person in the school. And he did it in such a way where you were kind of like laughing along with him, but then you just kind of be like, I don't like this, like this. And I there was one time where it was after a drama show that we were in together, no big deal, like we did drama. But he was talking to me, and he was like, yeah, the reason I do it is because like I just feel, and it may not even be true, but I feel like I'm going to be in such an uncomfortable position at some point that I would just rather just take myself out of it. And I mean, it is awful. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. You know, like I feel like everyone who kind of suffers or has some kind of challenge where they don't feel included or of great value at some point does that. And as my therapist says, this is not a comedy show. Please stop.
100% agree. Like I've done that several times, and I'm starting to get to a point where I am aware that I do it, so I don't do it as much anymore. And I think that because of that, it's made relationships better, and I've increased being more vulnerable in that manner as well.
Yeah. And I think, you know, you talked about this in the very beginning when we first started talking, where he, you know, writes that email and he's like, are you happy? And I feel like, you know, that in like the last 2 years of his life, he definitely started realizing, you know, I can't talk for him, obviously. This is just like what I noticed. Sure. That, you know, there is that big gap between what you perceive other people to be experiencing and what you know you are experiencing. And just in my personal experience, the less value I have in an experience, I will just assume that all of that value I'm missing is going to another person's experience. Like, all of these people are having a great time because I'm not a part of it. And it kind of like, that kind of gets into your head, and it's so sad, especially when I first read about, you know, his suicide and the, you know, the factors around it. You know, it was just so tragic because, you know, people kind of like picked up on the despondency. But, you know, at some point you see someone go up to their room so many times and come back down the next morning for breakfast, you're not going to think that that's the time. And I think that's a really important part of this documentary, is just kind of realizing that we are not experiencing another person's experience, and it's really important to check in on people.
Yeah, context means a lot because when we meet people, we're meeting them out of context for the remainder of their day. And so if someone in the grocery store is a dick to you, be kind to them because you don't understand why they are that way. And I'm not trying, maybe they're just that way 100% of the time, but chances are 9 times out of 10 that if you love and you show kindness to someone, we talked about this in Pig, is that you can see a complete change in them and how they react. And I feel like also, to your point as well, like, you don't know. I think about the finale to this movie, and you think about how many tearful goodbyes there were about people processing Bourdain's suicide. It's like, I never in a million years would have imagined that would have been the last conversation or the last time that I saw him. And be mindful of your words, covet your relationships, and on top of that, like, cherish every moment that you have with that person, because we're not promised today. Like, I could go to the park and hang out with someone in Micah. I'm just gonna throw him out as a
hey Micah.
I could just end up going out to a park and be like, all right, man, I'll see you like next week or something like that, and between then and now, like, just not be here anymore. Like, my heart could cease to stop, car accident, there's a number of just factors. Life is precious, and I feel like deaths in general remind us of how precious and how fragile life really is.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to one of my friends about this today, because one of the things that I'm kind of challenged with currently is kind of being in and out of relationships and kind of like monitoring what's too stressful for me, what I could be doing more as part of like my borderline personality disorder symptoms, and like trying to, measure it properly. And one of the things we were talking about is, how I do come in and out. I'm sure you've noticed that before. But what I try and do is be mindful of the times that I am available and I am emotionally there. I try to not wreck myself for the times I'm not, and I wish I could be, because I can't. But that's especially after losing my sister to suicide. Like, we didn't have a lot of moments because we were both in and out. She had borderline personality disorder, unbeknownst to me, as did I. And so we were just kind of like this revolving door of in and outs. And I think, we both had so many challenges in our lives that we kind of saw each other as like a survivor. Like, I saw her as like the greatest survivor, and I was the weakest person, and she saw the opposite of that. And so when she did pass away, I kind of realized, that was a lesson I learned, is even though we couldn't be there all the time, to put more of yourself in the times that you can be. Like just what you were saying, like, you might say, like, see you next week, and you might not, kind of like Anthony Bourdain going up the stairs for dinner, like for bed, like he always did, and he didn't come back down. And you kind of like get caught in these routines of what you expect of this person, like, and how you project and see them. And that could just not be the case at all.
Yeah. And I also, just to your point, like, I also want to stress the fact of, just covet the time you have. Like, just absolutely, like, make the best of your time. And like, I understand, like I said earlier, like, relationships are messy, like, and 9 times out of 10, like, I mean, if you truly value a friend, you are going to go to the ends of the earth and back for them, and have those uncomfortable conversations. And when it comes down to fighting, you're going to fight, and it's going to be ugly, and it's going to be brutal, and you're absolutely going to hate every second of it. But I promise that all of those uncomfortable conversations that you're going to have are going to make you stronger. I look at the relationship that I have with Brandon here, that writes for us. We've known each other for 10 years, if not longer, and we went through a period where, like, we fought over something really dumb, and it lost we just shut each other out of our lives for like 4 or 5 years. When we connected, when we reconnected, I was just starting Victims, and a large portion of the first year of us being friends again, we had to really learn everything. And I kid you not, like, Brandon is one of the best guys I know. I would very much call him like my best friends outside of my wife. I love that guy. We talk every day, and we have been through so much crap in the last 10 years and so much fighting, but because I care enough about the relationship, I'm going to constantly be pursuing that and saying, all right, man, like, I messed up, or, you know, hey, like, I took offense to this, like, how can we rectify this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny you mentioned that story. Hi, Brandon, by the way. It's so funny you mentioned that story because I have something very similar. My best friend, Mike, outside of, you know, my Brandon, you know, we've been best friends for 15-ish years now, but we went through a period of like 4 years. We just did not acknowledge each other's existence. And then it was over something stupid. It was over like a girl he was dating or something. I don't even remember. But and since all been rectified, even with the girl. But, you know, like, looking back with, you know, this documentary, there's a really poignant scene where one of the people who's being interviewed, he gets all teary-eyed, and he's like, yeah, Anthony said something to me that I would never expect him to say. He said, "You're a bad father." And he just starts kind of breaking down. And someone off camera was like, do you think that he was projecting? And he was like, yeah, of course he was projecting. And I think that's something that you really kind of need to be cognizant about. And, you know, that's why I'm so thankful for Victims, is because, you know, that education of mental health and mental illness and the stigma around it, you know, we're not always healthy and we're not always presenting our best selves, but that shouldn't be on us to always be presenting our best selves. And like having that understanding with these people you love in your life, and just kind of taking a moment instead of just reacting immediately, just be like, oh, well, are they hurting? How can I help? Should I give them space? What can I do? And even like in a relationship, even if you aren't, you know, connected at that point, still keeping that healthy.
One of the best resources I've come across in doing Victims has been, there's a subsidiary, I guess it's like campaign of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and it's called Seize the Awkward. And basically it teaches you how to have those awkward conversations. So like when you have to call out someone being like, I don't think you're mentally healthy right now, and these are the signs X, Y, and Z that I've seen and I've experienced. Let's talk about those. Let's break down these barriers that society has put on and stigmatized around these topics, and let's just be vulnerable with one another. And I think that is really what is going to make or break relationships, is how much vulnerability you're going to, and borderline also confrontation, how much you're going to be putting into that. Because sometimes when it comes to relationships, you need to be confrontational, whether you like to or not. It's going to be the lifeblood of your relationship.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, there's the whole thing about, you know, I said earlier, like, checking in with people. You know, I'm definitely a person who, like, when someone checks in with me, like, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm fine. I mean, it's not true, but, you know, like, they checked in. It's like, yeah, fine, thanks for checking in. Some of my best friendships that I have are people who challenge me on that. They're like, well, are you really fine? I haven't heard from you in 4 days. Are you really fine? One of my best friends, Erin, who I actually met in rehab, and now she also works as a mental health counselor. She'll literally text me and be like, how much water have you drank today? Have you eaten today? And
so awesome.
You know what? Yeah, I not to infantize myself, but I fucking need that sometimes. And she can pick up on it. And like, sometimes we just need that, you know, like, it's, to me, that isn't even awkward anymore. It's like, that's how she shows me she loves me. And I love that.
That's one of the things that, like, anytime my wife is kind of like feeling like not herself, and be like, have you drinking enough water today? Did you have coffee today? But also, you know, keeping those accountabilities. Like, one of the things that we make as a requirement for victims and villains, writers and podcasters, is that you have to be held accountable on your mental health. And if there's a season of your life that you need to step away, like, that's completely fine. Like, you know, we need to have those conversations and learn to be bold, for lack of a better word.
No, absolutely. I think one of the biggest, you know, downfalls I know I've personally experienced and the way I manage relationships is having like these expectations for, how do I put this? Having these expectations for like how a conversation should go, or like, you know, like what is good enough. And, you know, kind of going back to the whole like seize the awkward thing, like having to be cognizant of myself. And like, if I find myself getting mad that someone's asking me, like, have you drank enough water today? Then that's a very clear representation of where my mental state is. And, you know, like, it's even since being with victims, you know, I've only grown more comfortable being open with you guys. And like, it's great. We have like this running chat going all the time, but it's sometimes it can be hard, and you kind of like expect people to pick up on these symptoms. And I think the main storyline that I'm getting at here is that we just all have to stop expecting everything from each other. You know, like, if there are days where I can't communicate, that means there are days you can't communicate, and just like trying to figure out how to fix it. Oh,
absolutely. There are days at least once a week where I'm just like, I'm not mentally healthy enough to be engaged in a state where I can communicate with someone on social media. Like, I just need to withdraw myself and unplug, and that's okay. And, you know, you don't have to constantly be plugged in. And that's one of the most heartbreaking things about the Bourdain story, is that here you have a guy that started out doing these travel things well before social media was ever a thing. And not only is he doing the show 250 days of the year, but he's also simultaneously also doing social media in his spare time.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring this up earlier when we were talking about the jiu-jitsu thing, because I got on Instagram. I was pretty late to the game with everything in my life, honestly. And I started following Anthony Bourdain, and it was during the jiu-jitsu period. And my goodness, if I don't know 2 or 3 jiu-jitsu moves by now, just by following him on Instagram, I'll tell you what, like, it was every day, constantly. And I think, you know, like, that was kind of this gets brought up in the documentary too, but kind of like a subtle cry for help, you know. And like, I see that too in how I engage with people. Like you said, like, sometimes I just need to back away, and I kind of have this warning that I tell people, and I've actually talked to you about this too, where it's like, I might not respond for 3 or 4 days. It's nothing personal. It's just, I just need to take a step back. And I unfortunately just had a friendship that kind of ended formally, because, you know, that's just not what we needed from each other. We weren't giving each other what we needed, and that's okay too. But just kind of harboring your expectations and keeping them realistic, and just understanding that we're all just people, and we're all, you know, I talk about the human experience all the time, but none of us are good at it. And so we can only learn from each other, and we have to communicate. Yeah.
And it also, like, expecting that, you know, and understanding that there are 2 people in the relationship, that it's not just about your needs, but it's also about the needs of the other person. Like, there are so many times where, like, I'll find myself conversating with my wife, or even with, like, really close friends, where I'm just like, all right, like, you're not yourself. Like, what can I do to, you know, make you feel, you know, loved, or make you feel a little bit better? Like, do I need to just sit down and listen to you? Do I, like, need to get you a glass of, like, water? Or, like, do you need to rant? Like, what do you need? And, you know, not to try and, like, fix everything, but, you know, sometimes that's just what people need, is they just need to vent and have a listening ear, and know that someone's actually there and cares enough to hear them.
Yeah, in my relationship with my Brandon, he's a fixer. He's a, you know, wants to put his hands on something and fix it, and like, it makes him really frustrated if you can't fix it. And unfortunately for me, a lot of my issues or challenges that I have are not things that can be fixed, quote unquote. Like they are just, it's a process. Everything kind of for me is a process. And that's a really good point of just what you're saying, where it's like sometimes you just have to take yourself out of it and let that person kind of fill the room and let them have that space. And, you know, going back to Anthony Bourdain, the end of the documentary, I was talking to one of my friends about it today, and he brought up a really good point where, you know, like at the very end, it just, while I understand what they were trying to capture in the essence of losing someone, especially so suddenly, I've been there, I understand what they were trying to get at. A lot of it just, how do I put this in a way where I don't sound like an asshole? Everything just kind of seemed so, like, I lost this person, they're gone, like, how dare they leave me? And I kind of felt at the end of it, like, where's the room for his story? You know, because it's not like anyone lives 60 plus years and they have just nothing there. You know, like he had a daughter, he had a wife, he had a career, he had fans who he felt very accountable for. And you kind of have to weigh that and understand that and measure that pain. I feel like that's something that I lost in the documentary.
100%. And I feel like also too, like, yes, this film does showcase very well kind of the impact that Bourdain's suicide had on those that he held close to him, but it also, like we were talking about with his addiction earlier, is that it hyper focuses on the kind of the larger narrative of his life and not necessarily these like intimate details. And I think that we have this like practice of doing and just kind of like looking at someone's life at like, especially with suicide, just saying, okay, like this is where we are right here. Like this person is going to just be known solely for their depression, their suicide. And so many cases, so many times in the world, like there are numerous people that have so much more to offer than how they died. And we get so wrapped up in the cause of their death that we fail to understand that they lived an entire life, whether that's 20 years or whether that's 60 years.
Excuse my dog, Travis. So the way I kind of manage these thoughts, you know, especially like the intimacy of dealing with it with my family and, you know, Anthony Bourdain, is no one's suicide is just a suicide story. Mm-hmm. Like the way I think about Anthony Bourdain, to me, it's an addiction story. The way I think about my sister, that is a healthcare advocacy story. You know, like no one is just a suicide. And I think, you know, our culture gets so wrapped up in like the tragedy and loss and impact of a suicide. And honestly, you know, as someone who is in mental health, how often I hear it referred to as the most selfish act. And it's like there's so much more. It's completely discounting a person and their experience and, you know, like their space. They're like, just because they're not there to advocate for themselves doesn't mean that there's nothing worth advocating for. And what I hope with, you know, the Anthony Bourdain story is that people don't just see it as like, oh, it's this really famous person who could have had everything, but he ended up killing himself. It's about a person who was this child addict who never felt the love that he never felt love because of his addiction, and because it wasn't healed and processed correctly, that carried on into his life, and that carried on into his relationships, and ultimately it carried on to his death. And that should be, you know, the story that we understand is, let's fix addiction. Let's not talk about why he's gone. Let's talk about what we can do to fix it.
Yeah, and I just want to jump off of that as well. If you or someone you know is listening to this and you're going through it, please consider the resources in the description below. This is the reason we create this content. We want to talk about mental health. It's the reason why we do all of the podcasts, all of the movie reviews, is to have conversations and just to be blunt about mental health and point people in the right directions. And I think that's going to wrap it up for our conversation on Roadrunner. This has been a podcast about Anthony Bourdain, but where can people find you online?
Well, my Instagram handle is at JaneGoatee, as in Boba Fett. Boba Tea, you get it? It's JaneGoatee. If you want to see my dog Travis and my 2 kitties, that's basically all it is. Let's be real. Oh, and my boyfriend's VHS collection is now a growing theme in my Instagram.
It's so true. It's so true. And on that note, you guys can find me. I am on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can also find us everywhere at Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, and Ko-fi. The latter 2, you guys can help us get mental health resources in schools, conventions, and film festivals, and much more. You guys can go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find more podcasts like this, movie reviews, and most importantly, our suicide prevention resource library. Thank you guys for joining us on this conversation about Anthony Bourdain, depression, addiction, and so much more. Please go see Roadrunner. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.